It all began with a funeral that felt wrong. Not because of what was said or how it was done, but because of what was missing: answers. A young widow stood in grief beside a closed casket, mourning the man she believed she'd spend the rest of her life with. But months later, a single image surfaced that would unravel the carefully folded layers of that tragedy. What followed was a descent into deception, lost truths, and a question that no one was prepared to confront. Was Brendan Mercer ever really dead? In March 2015, residents of Spokane, Washington gathered at a modest chapel in the city's north end to attend the memorial service of 33-year-old Brendan Mercer. The obituary described a fatal accident, a car crash while en route to Missoula, Montana, where Brendan was headed to say goodbye to his late mother. He never made it. Authorities had discovered his SUV, burnt and twisted, deep in the woods near the Idaho border, about 12 miles outside Kerdane. It had veered off a remote Forest Service road, tumbled into a ravine, and collided violently with a tree before going up in flames. The body found in the driver's seat was charred beyond recognition, though the remains were unidentifiable to the naked eye. A combination of partial dental records, pieces of Brendan's ID, and fragments of the license plate confirmed the vehicle belonged to him. The 2006 Ford Explorer had been his for nearly a decade. No autopsy could determine an exact cause of death due to the extensive damage, but investigators concluded it was consistent with blunt force trauma and fire-related injuries from a high-speed crash. Brendan had worked as a logistics supervisor at Inland Pacific Freight, a mid-sized company based in Spokane Valley. He was known at work as punctual, organized, and private. However, documentation from his personal life revealed a man under pressure. His marriage had been troubled for months. Neighbors spoke of loud fights and long silences between Brendan and his wife, 31-year-old Olivia Mercer. Olivia had recently given birth to their first child, a son named Jalen, just weeks before the crash. Medical records indicate that the birth had been complicated, an emergency cesarean section followed by a slow, painful recovery. Brendan, according to friends and family, had grown emotionally distant during that time. After his mother passed away in early February 2015, Brendan chose to travel to Montana alone for the funeral. Texts between him and Olivia in the days leading up to the trip were polite but terse. The last known communication from Brendan came in the form of a text message sent on the morning of February 18th. Leaving now. See you Monday. He never came back. Less than a day later, his vehicle was found wrecked and burned. 2 weeks later, a somber service was held. The ceremony was short, under 40 minutes, with few personal touches. The casket never opened. Olivia, dressed in a plain black dress and holding her infant son, remained quiet throughout the event. Those in attendance described her as reserved and emotionally detached. The Washington State Patrol, tasked with investigating the crash, found no signs of tampering or mechanical failure. The road conditions were icy, and fatigue was listed as a likely contributing factor. With no evidence to suggest foul play, the case was ruled an accident. Brendan's death certificate was issued within 10 days, and his life insurance policy, a $250,000 plan established in 2012, listed Olivia as the sole beneficiary. The payout was processed smoothly. For months, life moved on, or so it seemed. Then came the photo. It appeared in an online forum, posted by a traveler who had visited a roadside diner in Wyoming. In the background of the image, blurry but unmistakable, was a man bearing a striking resemblance to Brendan Mercer. Same build, same posture, even the same watch, according to one sharp-eyed Reddit user. At first, people dismissed it as coincidence. But when 2 more sightings followed in Nevada and New Mexico, and both times a man was using cash and avoiding cameras, the questions became impossible to ignore. Could Brendan have staged his own death? If so, why? Was it the crumbling marriage? The stress of new parenthood? Or was there something even deeper, something darker, motivating him to disappear? Authorities quietly reopened parts of the investigation. Olivia, when asked, claimed no knowledge of any plan or deception. She insisted that her husband was dead, that she'd buried him, and that she'd moved on the best she could. But without a body that could be positively identified through DNA, the doubts remained. One thing was certain. The man in that photograph looked alive. And for a case once closed with fire and ashes, that single image reignited everything. Just a few weeks after her husband's funeral, Olivia Mercer submitted a life insurance claim. By May 2015, the $250,000 payout had been processed and deposited. Publicly, it marked the end of a tragic chapter. Privately, however, a different story was quietly unfolding. In later conversations with investigators, Olivia admitted she had lingering doubts from the start. While Brendan and Olivia had endured a rocky stretch in their marriage, she still expected more than a single, abrupt text message before his fatal trip. Brendan was typically methodical and thoughtful, even during arguments. The absence of a note, voicemail, or farewell gesture nagged at her for years. Still, at the time of his memorial, she kept these feelings to herself. There were no public objections, no calls for a second autopsy, and certainly no media statements suggesting foul play. Brendan's death remained an open and shut case in the public eye. His name was etched into a simple granite headstone at Greenwood Memorial Terrace in Spokane. The burial plot, paid for using part of the insurance payout, remains there to this day. Olivia used $37,000 of the funds to settle medical expenses from her emergency cesarean section in December 2014. Another $91,000 went toward clearing the family's mortgage. The rest she placed into a trust for their infant son, Jalen. Life didn't stop, but it didn't resume normally either. Olivia returned to her part-time role at the Spokane County Assessor's Office. Her employee file shows consistent attendance, but minimal engagement. Co-workers recall her being quiet and emotionally reserved. She didn't bring up Brendan, ever. As one colleague put it, she showed up, did her job, and left. That was it. Meanwhile, the official investigation into Brendan's death wrapped up quickly. The Idaho State Police report acknowledged some irregularities, namely, a fuel receipt timestamped at 11:42 a.m. on February 18th, placing Brendan's SUV west of Post Falls, Idaho. That was nearly 40 miles from the crash site where his vehicle was later found. Despite this discrepancy, there were no known surveillance images or highway footage placing him beyond that stop. No one ever recovered his cell phone. The fire that consumed his vehicle was described as severe, but not outside the bounds of possibility for an accident involving fuel residues and synthetic interiors. The case was deemed accidental and closed without escalation. Olivia didn't push back. She told no one her suspicion. Not her friends, not law enforcement, not even her therapist, at least not right away. Later, that therapist would describe Olivia's state as numb and emotionally shut down, but not delusional. Still, Olivia found herself rereading Brendan's last message over and over. Leaving now. See you Monday. There was no goodbye, no indication of danger, just a promise that would never be kept. What Olivia didn't know, and what would remain hidden for years, was that around the same time she was settling funeral arrangements, a man checked into a cheap motel nearly 1,000 miles away. Going by the name Aaron Miles, he arrived at the Midline Extended Stay Motel off Edison Highway in Bakersfield, California. Motel records showed that he paid in cash for an 8-week stay. No ID was required, as state lodging laws in 2015 only mandated identification for stays over 30 days. The motel staff didn't ask for anything more. Years later, during a 2019 investigation, employees were interviewed again. They remembered little about the man who called himself Aaron. He kept to himself, didn't cause any problems, and refused housekeeping. He carried few belongings, a small cooler and a worn duffel bag. One maintenance worker recalled seeing a faint scar on the man's left wrist. He had light brown hair, some stubble, and looked to be in his mid-30s, matching Brendan's description almost exactly. By early June 2015, Aaron began applying for construction jobs. Using cash and forged references, he blended easily into the transient labor scene. He found off-the-books work on framing crews in Kern County. No one questioned his background. In that world, fake names weren't unusual. What mattered was that he showed up and did the work. At this point, no one suspected anything. Brendan Mercer had no known ties to California. Olivia had never mentioned Bakersfield, and Brendan had never lived or worked anywhere near the region. As far as law enforcement, insurers, and the rest of the world were concerned, Brendan was dead and buried. The man calling himself Aaron Miles was just another anonymous face in a crowd of day laborers. But all of that would begin to change in late 2018. Olivia's younger brother, Luke Carpenter, had decided to put together a digital photo album for the holidays. His plan was simple: collect old family photos, scan them, and upload everything to a private cloud drive for Olivia and Jalen. He wanted to preserve memories and maybe bring a little light to a family that had lost so much. What he found instead would ignite a storm. What began as a heartfelt family project soon unraveled a mystery that had been buried for nearly 4 years. In late 2018, Luke Carpenter decided to create a digital photo archive for his nephew Jalen, who was nearing his 4th birthday. The plan was simple: gather childhood pictures to preserve memories of the boy's early years, something Jalen could one day look back on and cherish. Luke used Google Photos to sort and group images, relying on its facial recognition system to help streamline the process. But then, something unexpected happened. The algorithm flagged an image under the name Aaron M. as a recurring face across multiple unrelated images. Curious, Luke clicked into the tag and found it connected to an open-source profile hosted on a California-based construction company's website. There, among employee photos, was a man listed as Aaron Miles, described as a crew supervisor at a site in Bakersfield. At first glance, the man seemed different. He had a fuller beard and longer hair than Brendan Mercer, Luke's brother-in-law, who had supposedly died in a fiery crashback in 2015. But the resemblance was undeniable. Something about the face, the bone structure, the jawline, the intensity in the eyes, stopped Luke in his tracks. He didn't panic. Instead, he examined the image carefully and picked out 3 key details. First, there was a slight irregularity in the man's nose, identical to a break Brendan suffered during a middle school baseball game. Then, a curved scar on the left wrist, which matched an injury Brendan had sustained during a 2008 job site accident. Finally, the shirt, a mustard yellow flannel with a faded plaid pattern. Olivia had once jokingly referred to it as Brendan's weekend armor. Still unsure, Luke enhanced the image using freely available software and uploaded it to a facial recognition platform. The results came back with an 87% match when compared to Brendan's archive photos. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to raise serious doubts. The next morning, Luke approached Olivia with the image in hand. Her reaction was swift and visceral. According to a statement later filed in court, Olivia stared at the picture in silence for nearly 10 seconds before speaking just 5 words. "That's his damn shirt." She didn't laugh. She didn't question whether it was a prank. She didn't say it looked like someone else. Instead, she asked for a printout and then walked out of the room. That night, Olivia and Luke began digging into Brendan's old digital accounts. Most of his online activity had ceased after February 18th, 2015, the day he was reported dead. But one email account stood out, a Gmail address using Brendan's initials. It had recently logged in from IP addresses in Los Angeles, May 2016, and Bakersfield, August 2017. Olivia still had access to some of their shared accounts from the probate process, but had never thought to monitor them beyond the first few months after his death. Delving deeper, they discovered that the Gmail account had briefly synced with an unfamiliar Android device, something never listed in Brendan's original phone records. The account itself was mostly inactive, save for 3 password reset attempts routed through cloak recovery emails. On November 22nd, 2018, Olivia contacted a private investigator based in Seattle. The PI, whose name was redacted in court filings due to involvement in separate fraud cases, agreed to look into the matter under strict confidentiality. He reviewed the photo, analyzed the metadata, and studied the activity logs. His initial response was chilling. "This happens more often than you'd think." He advised Olivia against going to law enforcement right away. Without concrete proof, any accusation would be easily dismissed. Instead, the goal would be to quietly verify the man's identity, track his habits, and document everything thoroughly before filing an official report. On December 2nd, 2018, the investigator flew to California. With him, he carried Brendan's last known government ID photo, a copy of his dental injury records, a burner phone, and a digital camera. His mission was simple: observe Aaron Miles, collect visual evidence, and confirm whether Brendan Mercer had somehow faked his death and built a new life. The construction company where Aaron worked was located in a light industrial area in East Bakersfield. Business registration documents confirmed that Aaron Miles was on the payroll. The listed social security number turned out to be fraudulent. Yet the man had been steadily employed since mid-2016, working as a laborer under a contractor status. No benefits, no tax filings. Surveillance began that same week. The man in the employee photo arrived daily between 7 o'clock and 7:30 a.m. in a dusty 2005 Dodge Ram bearing Nevada plates. He left around 4:30 p.m. and frequented a local diner where he always paid in cash. He was never seen using a smartphone or credit card in public. He lived quietly in a modest one-bedroom apartment near Edison Highway. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigator gathered 213 photographs, 16 short video clips, and pages of detailed notes, each one building a clearer case that Aaron Miles and Brendan Mercer might just be the same man. And all of it had started with a few childhood photos and a facial recognition glitch. The man under surveillance had peculiar habits. Quiet tells that betrayed familiarity. He cracked his knuckles when standing idle. He chewed the corner of his thumb while waiting in line. To the trained eyes of the investigator, and later to those who had known Brendan Mercer, these weren't just coincidences. They were deeply ingrained behaviors, subconscious habits linked to a man thought dead for nearly 4 years. He also wore clothing that raised eyebrows. A particular flannel jacket, a soft gray hoodie, work-worn cargo pants. Several items aligned with Brendan's known wardrobe, archived in family photos and remembered by Olivia Mercer. One detail stood out: a compass tattoo on the man's right forearm. It wasn't present in any of Brendan's medical records prior to 2015, but it looked relatively recent. Faint scarring and rich pigment suggested the ink had been applied within the last 2 to 3 years. By mid-January 2019, the private investigator had everything he needed. His report, containing dozens of images, behavioral notes, timestamps, and financial activity, was sent to Olivia and her brother Luke in Spokane. After some deliberation, Olivia signed a sworn affidavit stating her belief. Brendan had not died in the 2015 crash, but had instead faked his own death and created a new identity in California. They submitted the entire file to the Spokane Police Department. The report was quietly reviewed, and on January 18, 2019, the department reopened the case under a confidential internal inquiry. Their forensic unit was assigned to reassess the original identification materials from 2015. One key element of the case was re-examined: the dental evidence used to declare the burned remains as Brendan Mercer. Initially, the identification had relied on partial dental fragments matched to a scan from 2002, already 13 years old at the time of the crash. That scan had never been updated, and no DNA had been collected due to thermal damage to the remains. The pathologist reviewing the original match raised a red flag. The dental confirmation was labeled probable, not definitive. With no viable DNA and no updated dental records, the case suddenly tilted. The horrifying new possibility that the man buried under Brendan Mercer's name wasn't Brendan at all, but an unknown victim. As Spokane PD dug deeper, they discovered even more. Surveillance had placed a man known as Aaron Miles at a pawn shop on Niles Street on January 14, 2019. He went inside wearing a wristwatch and left without it. About an hour later, he appeared at a small financial services office nearby, where he wired $300 under the alias Robert Lewis to someone named Mark Davin in Yuma, Arizona. Investigators traced the transfer and found no official records tied to either identity. The account had been opened through a self-service kiosk, using a prepaid debit routing system that required no formal identification. Authorities concluded the transfer was likely a coded message or illicit drop, possibly linked to someone assisting Brendan in his new life. On January 20th, with mounting evidence and growing concern, Spokane PD reached out to the U.S. Marshal Service. Later that same day, A federal judge approved a sealed arrest warrant for Brendan Mercer, now wanted for identity fraud, insurance deception, and crossing state lines to avoid prosecution. Just after sunrise the next morning, the man once known as Brendan exited a hardware supply warehouse in Bakersfield, where he worked part-time under the table. He wore a hooded sweatshirt and carried a canvas tool bag. In his other hand was a cheap prepaid flip phone, one of the few digital tools he used sparingly and strategically. He didn't know two plainclothes U.S. Marshals had been trailing him since he left his apartment an hour earlier. As he crossed the parking lot, the Marshals approached calmly, without drawing their weapons. When asked his name, he replied, "Aaron Miles." But when Spokane County was mentioned, his demeanor shifted. He paused, locked eyes with one of the agents, then looked down and said nothing more. No attempt to flee, no denial. He was taken into custody on the spot. At the Bakersfield Police Department, fingerprinting confirmed the truth. Automated systems matched his prints to employment records from Brendan's previous job in Spokane. There was no room for argument. Biometric data doesn't lie. He was informed of the warrant and held in custody while awaiting transfer. During the intake interview, he remained quiet. He didn't request a lawyer. He didn't push back. According to the official report, Brendan Mercer, now unmasked and cornered, offered no resistance, no protest, and no explanation. After 4 years of silence, of pretending to be someone else, the man who vanished was finally found. In a quiet interrogation room, Brendan Mercer sat across from federal agents and calmly admitted what had once seemed unthinkable. He had faked his own death back in February 2015. The motivation? As he put it, "I didn't hurt anyone. I just wanted out." According to his statement, the decision had been building for months. He was on the verge of a bitter divorce, drowning in personal debt, and facing the potential loss of his home, retirement savings, and legal custody of his child. It would have taken everything, he said. He described the plan with unsettling precision. In late January 2015, he found a total Honda Accord listed in a classified ad posted through a local salvage yard. Paying cash and leaving no paper trail, he arranged for the damaged vehicle to be towed to a small storage unit he had rented under a fake name. Over several nights, he staged the vehicle to suggest it had been his. He placed inside it several items tied to his identity. A worn winter coat, a wallet stuffed with expired cards and metal scraps engraved with his name, and even an old dental retainer. To complete the deception, he doused the car's interior with accelerants and rigged the timed ignition system using instructions he found on internet forums. The crude device was built to ignite after he pushed the vehicle into a remote ravine near the Idaho border, an area with little to no regular traffic. As the fire took hold, Brendan slipped into the darkness, walking nearly 7 miles through dense forest to a prearranged pickup location. A taxi, reserved using a disposable burner phone, collected him from a roadside stop and dropped him in a nearby town. There, he changed clothes in a motel bathroom, dumped the burner phone into a gas station trash bin, and boarded a southbound bus. He claimed he had withdrawn around $12,000 in cash over several weeks, carefully keeping each transaction small to avoid suspicion. Using forged identity documents bought online under the alias Aaron Miles, he secured temporary housing in Bakersfield, California. According to his estimate, the entire plan cost him just under $6,000. But the most chilling part came when investigators asked him about the remains found in the burned-out car. "I didn't know him," Brendan said. "I didn't kill anyone." Yet investigators were already one step ahead. A cross-agency review had uncovered surveillance footage placing Brendan near a known homeless encampment in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, just 2 days before the crash. The camera didn't record any direct interaction, but Brendan was seen wearing the same boots later recovered in the burned vehicle. Now, the identity of the man who perished in the crash was being re-examined. Given the extensive fire damage, traditional DNA analysis was inconclusive. However, advanced mitochondrial DNA testing was initiated to try and identify the victim. Pending results, Spokane County officials reclassified the remains as a John Doe and opened a separate investigation into a possible homicide. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors moved swiftly. Brendan Mercer was charged with multiple federal offenses, including insurance fraud 18 U.S. Code Section 1033, identity theft, U.S. Code Section 1028, falsifying official records, and interstate flight to avoid prosecution. At the state level, Washington authorities charged him with abandonment, concealment of marital assets, and perjury for providing false information during the original death settlement. On March 12, 2019, Brendan was transferred from Kern County Jail in California to a federal detention center in Washington state. His request for bail was denied. Citing his elaborate history of deception and years spent evading capture, the U.S. Attorney's Office argued that he posed an ongoing flight risk and could compromise potential witnesses. In a brief press conference held shortly after the transfer, Olivia Mercer, his former wife, issued a short, pointed statement through her legal representative. "He planned his escape better than he ever planned our life," she said. She declined further comment and remained out of the public eye until the case went to trial. That trial came over a year later. On August 10th, 2020, Brendan Mercer appeared in front of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Washington. He was 38 years old, dressed in a navy blue Department of Corrections jumpsuit, his wrists secured at his waist. Brendan was flanked by two federal marshals as he entered the courtroom. He offered no grand statements, no emotional apology, just silence. For a man who had gone to such great lengths to disappear, the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. By the time Brendan Mercer stood before the court for sentencing, time had taken its toll. His hairline had noticeably receded, his shoulders slumped, and his expression, according to reporters in the courtroom, was unchanged from the day he was arrested. When given a chance to speak before the judge, Brendan offered only a brief and unsettling remark. "I regret the chaos, not the choice." The trial had spanned 3 weeks. Prosecutors presented a detailed account of Brendan's planning, disappearance, and life under a false identity. The evidence laid out was extensive and methodically constructed. Financial records showed a pattern of strategic withdrawals during late 2014 and early 2015, carefully timed to remain below federal reporting thresholds. Email data linked Brendan to the creation of the alias Aaron Miles. Store receipts revealed purchases of burner phones from 2 separate convenience stores in Washington. Testimony from the private investigator who tracked Brendan in early 2019 was submitted without objection. The Department of Justice's digital forensics experts took the stand to confirm IP activity from Brendan's original Gmail account, with login records traced to Los Angeles in 2016 and again to Bakersfield in 2017. Additional exhibits included high-resolution photographs of a compass tattoo obtained after 2015, along with behavioral analysis comparing Brendan's mannerisms before his disappearance to footage captured by the investigator. The defense did not dispute his identity or challenge the facts. Olivia Mercer, Brendan's former wife, was called to testify on the 4th day. Her appearance was brief but impactful. She confirmed the key events: their legal marriage, Brendan's unexplained disappearance, the official death certificate, and her receipt of the insurance funds. She spoke quietly as she described organizing a funeral for an empty casket and the emotional toll of raising their son under false assumptions. When asked if she had anything to say to her ex-husband, Olivia didn't hesitate. "He left me with a newborn and a funeral. I buried an empty box. That's the man he is." Midway through proceedings, a crucial revelation changed the tone of the trial. The FBI's forensic laboratory concluded mitochondrial DNA testing on the charred remains found in the burned-out car back in 2015. The victim was identified as 52-year-old Todd Garrison, a homeless Army veteran last seen near Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, just days before the stage crash. Garrison had no surviving family and had been living in a makeshift encampment beneath Interstate 90. Investigators believe Brendan encountered him during this time and took advantage of his vulnerability. Surveillance footage confirmed Brendan's presence near the camp in the days leading up to fire. Receipts tied him to purchases of food and propane from a nearby store. At the crash site, investigators recovered an empty prescription bottle bearing Garrison's name. While it remained unclear how Garrison ended up inside the salvage vehicle, the evidence pointed toward manipulation. Authorities believe Brendan may have lured him under false pretenses, though the exact circumstances could not be proven. Because of these evidentiary gaps, Brendan was not charged with homicide or manslaughter. The prosecution acknowledged that the extreme condition of the remains and lack of direct evidence made it impossible to meet the burden of proof for such charges. Still, the judge referenced the death in the final remarks, labeling the result of reckless endangerment with fatal consequences. The court stated Brendan's deception didn't just target insurance companies or legal systems. It directly contributed to the death of a man already living on the edge of society. On August 14, 2020, Brendan Mercer received a sentence totaling 22 years in federal prison, 10 years for insurance fraud, 18 U.S.C. Section 1033, 5 years for falsifying a death certificate, 4 years for identity theft, 3 years for financial deception and abandonment of dependent obligations. He was placed in a medium-security federal facility in Oregon. No appeal was filed. Court documents show Brendan chose not to pursue post-conviction relief and waived any right to challenge the effectiveness of his legal counsel. The man who spent years building a new identity now faces over 2 decades living under his real one, behind bars.